Hello world. In this tutorial, if you code along, you will learn how to build a full stack web application coded in MERN. So we will be writing every line of code needed to perform a full stack web application that performs CRUD operations, create, read, update, and delete on whatever entity you want to do. I made a silly pet owner. You could use music, CDs or albums, you could use movies, you could use whatever thing you want to keep track of, whatever's in your refrigerator, whatever you want to keep track of, you can make a web application to do that. This is kind of a very foundational topic in web development, to be able to learn how to interact with the full stack, from React on the front end to Mongo databases on the back end. To kind of demo my database, you can kind of see I'm doing a read operation on my database, and you can see these documents. So these documents out of my database are being presented this way on my website, and so we are already demonstrating the read. If I perform an update on one of my records, Jane Doe with 3 E's or 2 E's, you could see, of course, an update operation is working on my database. If I added a dog, another Marley Jr. here on Bob Marley, and I can refresh my database and just show you that updates are also working against the database. And of course, a delete is going to pop open a Bootstrap modal window to confirm the delete operation. And so this is a bare bones web application that is performing CRUD. Now, you will also learn how to deploy this application on the internet. This is a live URL. You could type it in and access my web application, and you can give myself pet owners and modify them and delete them. Okay, and so you could give me 100 different pets, and that's totally fine. Different pet owners. I'm also going to show at the end of this how to tie this into a custom domain, because this is deployed to GCloud. I'm going to show you how to deploy to GCloud. However, in a real world production app, of course, you want this to be tailrunner.com or whatever your custom domain name is. Okay, so I will show at the very end of this how to get your service running on GCloud, your web application service, to be on a custom domain name. So that's really what's unique about this tutorial. Of course, it is a full stack working CRUD app, but also the deployment to GCloud is not something you're going to find on most tutorials, as well as tying in that real world domain name. Very useful stuff. So I hope you enjoy. I do encourage you to code along with your own entities, and so pick a thing, whatever that thing may be, computer parts or whatever is in your pantry. It's completely up to you, and perform CRUD operations full stack MERN. Hope you enjoy. So now I would like to go over the software that will be used to develop this application. And so these are the software tools, the IDEs, if you will, to write your code in, and that we will utilize during this tutorial. To start with, the N in MERN obviously stands for Node. Node is a runtime environment where you can run JavaScript on the server, so we will need to download and install Node. If you're on Windows or Mac, what have you, you should be able to go to Node.js.org, download the installer, run the installer, and get Node supported. And you do want the LTS version, the long-term support version of Node. And if you're doing this, any version newer than mine should work. Okay, and so, I'm working on version 20, so if you're watching this in the future, you're just fine. Make sure that you do have at least Node up to date. If you downloaded, for example, if you downloaded Node over a year ago, you will probably want to update your version of Node, because I will be using some modern features that you will need that update. So download and update if you haven't updated your Node version in a while. I will also be using Visual Studio Code, so download and install VS Code, probably one of the most popular IDEs today. And I will be using GitHub Copilot. Now, a lot of what I do is in this tutorial is I've already written this code, so I won't be writing this code from scratch. I'll just be kind of copying and pasting it over and explaining it, okay, and explaining what everything is line by line, how it works. Okay, so I do have GitHub Copilot. I'll probably leverage that from time to time, but that's a very common question that I get, which is, hey, what's that autocomplete tool that you're using? And I will say that GitHub Copilot does come at a cost. I'm sure that there is a freemium. You could probably get it for free up to a certain point, but then again, I'm not sure of that. So you can try the GitHub Copilot extension in VS Code. And if I just kind of boot up VS Code and I go to my extensions, you could see that I do have GitHub Copilot installed. And that's the main one that I'm going to use here. Here's my extensions if you want to. I got a lot of extensions, but I think the only one you're really going to need there is GitHub Copilot. If that changes, I will let you know. Then the Mongo database. So I will use what's called Mongo Compass. That is this tool down here. MongoDB Compass is the GUI, as it says right there, from Mongo database. If you haven't, you will want to register for an account. So you will want to sign up. So do that. If you've never written a line of Mongo script, or if you've never worked with Mongo database, go ahead and sign up for a free account before you download and install Compass. You will need an account on MongoDB.com to connect to your database, right? So there is a requirement for you to have an account and then download that tool. So Node, let's get Node installed. Let's get Visual Studio Code installed. Let's make an account on MongoDB.com, and let's download and install Mongo Compass. The last tool, if you're doing deployment, now keep in mind you don't have to follow this tutorial through all the way through deployment. I think that's one thing you don't find in a lot of tutorials is actual deployment of code, and there's a whole layer of troubleshooting and problem solving when you deploy an application. So I do recommend doing deployment. However, you don't have to. If you do plan on deploying to GCloud, you will need the GCloud CLI, the command line interface. And so the URL is up here. It's cloud.google.com/SDK/doc/install. Okay, /install will get you to this page. If you leave off the fragment there, this is the page that you need. And you can go down here, download the CLI installer. I'll go ahead and link to a card in the video right about now that will walk you through installing this GCloud CLI installer. It's in terms of software installs, everything here is like default settings. Just next all the way through. Download, install, just select the default settings, next all the way through. This CLI installer, there's a few questions that maybe you want, help getting help answered. And so if you follow that card, I walk through an install with one of my students, and I did this a few months ago. So you can watch that video and watch how to run this installer and what options to select and how to configure it. From memory, the big thing when you run this installer is you do need to authenticate it with your Google account. And so after you run the installer, there's like an initialization wizard that you're going to want to run, and you're going to want to connect it to your Gmail account so that it knows who you are, so that when you go to cloud.google.com, right, that when you go to this console is associated with my Gmail account, and there's my Gmail account, right? So The command line tool also has to be associated with that same command line account. Okay, so this installer, and I'll also say this installer takes like 5 or 10 minutes. Most installers, you just click, 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 click. It installs very fast. This GCloud installer takes a little bit of time, and again, I would recommend watching that video. So those are the tools that we will use in this tutorial, and that's what you'll need to get started. The other thing that you will need if you're going to do deployment is the free credits from Google Cloud. So again, the deployment is optional, but if you choose that's something you want to do, and again, I do recommend it, you will need to go to cloud.google.com and scroll down. You'll see I'm not logged in. Go ahead and log in. But allowing me to not be logged in allows me to see these credits. Try Google Cloud with free usage. And you'll need to go ahead and sign in here. This will get you the free credits. You will need to enter a credit card. However, you can definitely cancel your subscription before you end up paying any money. So I do recommend going through that if that's something you want to do. All right, now I want to set up the project. And so these steps are just going to be basically getting the backend Express server going with the front end built-in React. And so I'll start right here on my desktop, and the project is just a CRUD application, and I'm just doing pet owners, right? So pet owner, now I call it TR, the folder name TR for tail runner. It's just kind of a silly name for tail representing dog, runner being like a dog running service, if you will. Now you want to open up this folder in Visual Studio Code. So I like just right clicking it, and I've got an open with code option. If you don't have that, of course, you could just open up VS Code and go to File, Open Folder. Of course, two ways to do the same task, and I'm going to open up my TR folder. Okay, now this is going to be the root folder for my application, and right off the bat, if I go to Terminal, Start Terminal, New Terminal. Okay, now if you're zoomed in like I am, let me zoom out, and you could just see the terminal menu is there if I zoom out. But I like to zoom in so you guys can see the code, and therefore you don't see that terminal on the menu there. But let me open up a new terminal. And the first thing, if you have Node properly installed, you should see your Node version. Okay, and I do recommend getting that latest version of Node. And to start a package, we're going to do an npm init -y, and this is going to open up a package.json with all the default answers. And so it just creates this package JSON, which will allow us to have dependencies, npm dependencies. And so right now you can customize any of this for your project. You can kind of see the main file is my index.js. I'm going to add in a type attribute of module, and this is going to allow us to have ESM modules, so we can use the import syntax instead of the require syntax. And basically this is an updated syntax is what this is going to allow us to have. And then I have 3 more dependencies on the back end that I'm going to go ahead and install with the npm I command. I'm going to go ahead and close my package JSON so no conflict. I'm going to install the Express dependency, the MongoDB driver, and I like the MongoDB driver instead of Mongoose because it allows you to get very low level to write the actual queries against the Mongo database. This is my preferred package for interacting with Mongo. Again, if you're familiar with Mongo syntax for writing your own queries, that's why I like it. And I'm also going to install cores for the cross-origin scripting, right? So allowing scripts to be shared from the front end to the back end. Okay, so these are the 3 dependencies. We can go ahead and install it once. That'll bring in the node modules folder. And now if I open up my package JSON, we can see these dependencies. You know what? I left one off. Let's bring in the debug. npm I, the debug dependency. So these are backend dependencies that we will use to build up our backend. At the same time, let's go ahead and bring in our scripts. Now, these scripts will allow us to run our source code. So we will run the scripts to basically run the source code. There's going to be a start script, and this is getting us to where we want to go. However, the more modern syntax for bringing in my .env file is --env file .env. So this is now built into Node. Instead of having an env dependency, we can now bring in environment variables with this little switch here. And we're going to do the same thing with, I typically have my dev script called start dev, and this is NodeMon. Now, if you have not installed NodeMon before, okay, typically you install NodeMon as a global dependency. So you go to npm.js, search for NodeMon. NodeMon is a really nice dependency that kind of reboots our backend server every time you make a change to your source code. So you can npm I NodeMon, but you want to switch G. You want to switch G so that you can install it globally on your machine and you don't have to install NodeMon on every package. So I've already installed NodeMon, so I don't need to run this command, but if you've never installed NodeMon before, go ahead at your terminal, run that npm I NodeMon -G, switch G, and that'll install NodeMon globally. All right, now you can see our home file is index.js, so let's go ahead and bring in index.js, and this is where we're going to bring in our Express server. So Express is a fast, unopinionated, minimalist web framework for Node.js, and so, you know, if you want a web server, that's what Express gives us quite easily. And that allows us to have back-end routes and back-end code built in JavaScript on Node. And so I just typically go to the Express docs and I kind of bring in the hello world. Okay, but I use imports instead of the require. So I will import Express from Express, and then I'll bring in hello world. And sure, port 3000. If I run my script just to kind of boot up my Express server, and we are on our way. So to run that, npm run start dev script. So this is the start dev command. npm run start dev says run that script. That's going to be our NodeMon command. And it says it doesn't find my .env file, so let's put a .env from environment variables and make that happy. Now there's nothing in there, but nonetheless, we're a little bit closer. Now we don't know what Express is, and I thought let's type Express correctly and solve that problem. Okay, and we could see that our Express app is listening on port 3000. And if I go to localhost :3000, we get hello world, and our Express app is up and running. And that's the beginning of our back end. Now to make sure that our .env is working, we can do process.env.port. So this says, hey, use the port variable in our .env file or use 3000. Okay, so if it can load the port variable first, then we'll do that. Let's go ahead and create our port variable equal to 4000. Get this phone call. Now, anytime we change our .env file, I do need to manually stop and reboot So Control C to stop. Control C will stop the terminal. And you can see now we're listening to 4,000. So we are loading my EMV file correctly. That is a lot easier than it used to be using the .env package. So that's nice. We're listening on 4,000. Now I suppose the thing to do is to kind of bring in our debug dependency. And so this is a couple more imports up at the top. And instead of doing console logs, if you bring in this debug dependency, and you can kind of see here, we're going to make essentially a channel. And so these are fancy, basically color-coded, if you will, console logs. And so there's two steps. Number one, we got to import the debug. And then number two, we need an environment variable in our .env that says our debug channels can start with the word app and then anything after that. So our debug channels start with the word app and then anything after that. So you can kind of see here our debug channel starts with the word app, and then this is the index file. And so app:\index, and then I replace my console log now with this debug index. And if I save that, and I need to close it down because I did change a .env, so reboot my server. And I'm not getting my console log. And so let me double check real quick my work. It didn't take long to find a typo. Debug. Debug, not debug. This is debug. Sometimes you go too fast. So now if I run it, now I get my console log, and we got this nice red color showing me the index file. Example app listening on port 4000. However, no one likes that. Let's just make this a link. http://localhost:/. And so now if you hold down control, you can control click, opens up a browser, and we get hello world. So we no longer have to type that in. That's beautiful. Couple more what I would consider to be boilerplate, and I will explain these lines of code as I bring them in. So we're going to install some middleware on our Express app, and the first, anytime you see the word app.use, we are installing essentially some middleware for the entire, for all the routes on our back end. This URL encoded allows us to get data from the front end and store that in the rec.body. So there's a rec variable that you'll see on our routes, and basically we're going to be sending data from the front end to the back end and storing that data inside of rec.body. This line allows us to send JSON and store it into the rec.body. So this allows us to send data in general, and this says, hey, let's make sure that we accept JSON from our front end. And then this line tells us to serve up a folder from our React site. Now we haven't created this yet, but we're going to create a React folder. We're going to call that React folder. It's a subfolder called Frontend. So right here in our root, we're going to have our React folder for our front end code. This is all of our back end code. We're going to call that front end, and then the dist folder is the deployment. Basically, once your React app is ready for distribution, you store the files in this dist folder. So we'll wire this part up real soon. This basically serves up our front end, and so serves static files for our React front end. Okay, and then the last thing to do is to be really friendly with cross-origin scripting, allowing cores. This kind of allows our back end and front end to play nicely together. A couple more imports. I think I have to use an import cores from cores. Okay, to get that to work. And Again, this is kind of boilerplate nowadays. To just, most of the Express apps have this as a starting point. Okay, not that you end there, but as a starting point. Now, the next thing to do, we can go ahead and install our front end, Control C, and we're going to use Vite to install React. So this is going to be our front end built in React. And so here's the command to install the latest version of React. And then it will give you some prompts. And so let's go ahead and type this or copy that and paste that. npm create Vite at latest. It's going to bring on in our Vite. Now, it's important to name your front end, your project name. I'm going to name it front end, as I have there in line 11. That's the name of the folder. So that's an important setting to change. And then I'm going to use the arrow keys to arrow down to the React option, select React. I'm just using vanilla JavaScript. I do want to transition eventually to TypeScript, but right now we're just using vanilla JavaScript in this tutorial. And it says done, now run these commands. Okay, so I'm just going to follow those instructions. I'm going to hit the terminal. I'm going to change directory into my front end. By the way, start typing FRO and hit tab, and that's going to autofill for you. I'm going to run the install command, npm I for short, install those front end dependencies. I'm going to have some different dependencies on the front end. We'll take care of that later. Okay, so this is downloading all those dependencies. And I've seen this on my machine a couple times where this should be done by now. There it goes. Okay, just be patient. And the last thing to do is actually just kind of run it and show that we've got kind of our template, Vite plus React. And so we got some front end code there. We will definitely be writing some front end code a lot more later. For right now, just to kind of change this front end code, I'm going to go into my app JSX. I'm going to delete most of this. All I got is a little fragment there. I'm going to delete this stuff that I'm not using. I'm just going to put a little H1. I'm going to say hello from my front end. Okay, control save that. And this is when you're currently just running the front end code. And that's good. All right, so let's control C. So I got the front end built. Now, whenever you're ready for deployment. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to deploy. I'm setting up this project and I'm going to do an early deployment. Again, if you're doing deployment or not, that's up to you. You don't have to do deployment, but in order to get the front end ready for deployment, there's a script, and I'll show off. This is the front end package JSON. Okay, so this is my Vite React, and there's a build script. See this build script right here? So I'm going to do npm run build. You're going to see it makes this dist folder. Remember, front end / dist. So this dist folder wasn't there before. So whenever you get your JSX kind of at a place you're ready for deployment, you can run that dist folder. But now if I run my backend, okay, now if I go back into my index, this is back on my Express server. Okay, I'm serving up my front end, and there's a home route here, but actually this line right here should essentially overwrite this line. So I should serve up my front end when I boot up my back end. So if I clear the screen, CLS, npm run start dev. This is running my back end. Notice I'm in my TR. I'm in the root directory here. So I got to be in the right directory to run this start dev script on my back end. And if I go to my localhost 4000, now I'm serving up my front end dist folder. Okay, and that's the desired result that I want. And now I can just kind of delete this home route because I don't want that home route, because I'm essentially wiring up my front end. Okay, so this is kind of a bare minimum. Just get the back end up and running, get the front end up and running, and let me pause just a second and make sure there's nothing else I want to do here before I do the initial deployment. Okay, I think we're ready to do at least an initial deployment. And so now I'm going to bring up a browser. Okay, and I'm going to go to cloud.google.com. Now I'm logged in, okay, under my Gmail account. And what you're going to do is obviously use those credits, okay? You can fast forward this section if you're not doing deployment, but if you're doing deployment, definitely deploy early. Now, when you go to the console, you know, I've got these different projects. I've kind of coded up Tailrunner once already, but what I recommend you doing, even if a project was created for you, okay, we're going to use we're going to create a new project, okay? And there's basically two things. There's a project name and there's a project ID, and both of those are similar but different. And so I'm just going to call this, again, I'm going with Tailrunner, and I'm going all lowercase. Okay, so Tailrunner is my project name. I've got my billing account, and I've got the one with my credits on it. So billing account for education is where I'm going. You should have a billing account if you're using those $300 of free credits. And I do not have an organization. Let me go ahead and create Tailrunner. Now you can see this is going to spin up for a little bit. So let that spin up. Okay, and I'm going to select that project. So you can see it's Tailrunner here. And I've got a project ID right here. Okay, Tailrunner. And the project name, again, it's the name and the ID in this case are the same, but they're not always. Okay, and so what you need to do in this case is copy that project ID, okay? And it might be different than the name, but that's okay. And so in the terminal, we're going to go into the terminal command. We're going to switch projects, GCloud. This is a pretty simple command to change projects. And so it's GCloud config set right here, GCloud config set project, and then your project ID. Okay, so in my terminal window, okay, again, if you're doing deployment and you followed the video, GCloud should be a recognized command. Okay, if you installed the SDK, and you know, as long as you're getting this, that's good. It's a recognized command. Only in the event that it says GCloud is an unrecognized command is the problem. Now, again, if you're following in that video, you may, once you install it properly, you may need to close the terminal, kill the terminal, and open up a new terminal window. In fact, close Visual Studio, reboot Visual Studio, then kill your terminal, then reboot. And sometimes you just really got to kind of reboot things to get these command line commands working. But yes, get GCloud command working, and then we can run just as we were talking about GCloud config set project, GCloud config set project, and paste in the name of your project. And here we could see updated property, so it worked. I do have some updates to run on GCloud. I can do that later. Okay, now there's a couple of commands, a couple of different ways you could deploy this. We're going to use GCloud run, and so GCloud run or Cloud Run is a way of containerizing your application, kind of newer to using containers, but thankfully this is a pretty easy process once you've done it once. And so we're going to use GCloud run deploy is the command, GCloud run deploy. Okay, and when you type it like this, the next thing, what's your source code location? And so this is our root directory, which is correct. I hit enter here. And this is the service name. So I'm going to call this tailrunner-service. Whatever the name of your project is, just do the name of your project -service. And you have to enable the following APIs. Yes, I want to do that. So Y enter. And I'm going to have to pause this because this just takes a minute. A couple more settings to select. You just want to pick the closest region to you. So I'm in St. Louis, Missouri. So I'm going U.S. Central. That's the closest region to me. It's 32. U.S. Central. And then it says, make it a default region. Okay, deploying. Well, do you want to continue? Yes, I do. Okay, and allow unauthenticated users. Yes, I want to do that. Unauthenticated users because we're on the internet. Okay, so once you get to this step, this will take a few minutes. Let me pause. Okay, and silly me, I did notice one thing I wanted to add before I initially deployed. No problem, we'll fix it real quick. You can see here, everything is done, and I have a service URL. Hold down Control, click, open it up. Give it a second to load, and it says hello from my front end, which is nice. I've now deployed. This is a live URL on the internet. Okay, now the first question that's obvious is, why isn't this something simple like www.tailrunner.com? And the answer is that's not a hard thing to configure. In fact, I'll kind of show that at the end here, how to configure that process. But basically it involves a DNS record. You're going to have to buy a domain name. Once you own a domain name, you need to redirect the name to a certain IP address, and problem solved. So I can show you that process so that the URL is user friendly. Obviously no one would ever want to type this URL in. But what I forgot is I close, and if I kind of refresh here, by the way, if you ever need to get to your URL, you're going to go to your project, go to Cloud Run, click on the service, Tailrunner service, and here's your URL. Okay, that ends in 290. So just something to remember here. The last 3 is 290. You can click on that and see that that's the URL of your application. I did not put a backend route on here. And so let's just make a backend route to demo that live on GCloud. Okay, so the way to do that is with the app.get. And this is kind of like the home route, but we know that the home route is going to serve up our static front end. And so I'll just say I'm going to make a different, /API. And so at /API, I'm just going to say, welcome from my Express API. So this is a route for the back end. Okay, so if I kind of clear the screen and I just run this locally. Okay, I run this locally and I go to /API, we hit our backend route. And I just want to make sure that the backend routes work on GCloud as well as my front end. And so now it's working locally. So let me stop that from running. And it's the same deploy command as earlier, right? GCloud run deploy. And you can look into all the switches and basically this way you don't have to answer all these questions that I do every time. Like your source code location, I just hit enter for the root. It says next time run --source dot to deploy the current directory. So I could shorten that up, but this never bothers me. The same service name, tail runner hyphen service. So I kind of overwrite that service name. I don't have like 10 different services, 10 different URLs. So tail runner service. It's a few less questions than last time. I'm just going to redeploy this to central and wait for it. Okay, and here we can see this URL. If I open that up, there's my front end. If I do /API, I am hitting my back end. So this is exactly what I wanted. Now, I guess what I meant to look at, I was looking at 290, I was looking at the wrong thing. I always want to make sure this URL doesn't change every time you redeploy. I don't think it does, and I'm just forgetting this. So looking at this URL, if I kind of scroll up in my terminal, I just want to make sure this was the same URL. I don't have it on there. At this point it doesn't matter, but nonetheless, there's our URL. Our project is set up. We've got a front end built in React. We got a back end built in Express. We're going to bring in Mongo, and we're on top of Node. So everything's working so far as setting up the project. And so next, what we're going to do next is we're going to set up all of our back end routes in Express. All right, now the next step, as you know, is to build the back end. And to test the back end, I realized there was a piece of software that left off of the software requirements, which is Postman. So you will want to go to postman.com and register, sign up for free. And then once you sign in, you can download the desktop application called Postman. And so once you sign up and sign in, here's the download for Windows, Mac, or Linux. Okay, go ahead and download, install the desktop app, and log in. Once you have Postman, so I'll go ahead and boot up Postman, and this is a tool for testing our back-end routes without building a front end. And so as I boot up Postman, you will want to log in. So you can see I'm already logged in to Postman. And so go ahead and download, install, and log into Postman. And those steps should be pretty straightforward. Now, I'll walk through the steps of actually using Postman here in a little bit. I'm not going to do that right now. I just want you to install that software, and we'll come back to it. All right. So what's up next is actually creating some back-end routes. And for that, I like to create my routes in a routes folder. Okay. Now, you could put your routes directly in your index.js, but really the purpose of index is to set up and configure your Express server. If you start putting routes, endpoints, if you start putting endpoints or routes in your index.js, it's just going to get really bloated really quick. It's considered a better practice to separate those concerns and keep your index or your starting point, your starting file, just to kind of set up your Express server and all the middleware, and kind of listen, get your Express server running, if you will. And so the routes, they kind of serve a different purpose. The routes, you might call them controllers. You know, they are going to handle your requests from the front end. And so when you start making front end requests, they're going to land on these back end routes. And so here I have this folder called routes, and there are API routes. And so another subfolder underneath routes is /API, and that's where I'm going to put my new file. This is going to be called pet owner and .js. Okay, and so with this is again where our routes are going to be. You bring in Express again, and you make a small Express server, and you connect the main Express server to what's called a router. And a router, I just view it as a smaller instance of Express. And so we do that by importing Express, and we make a router equal to express.router. So this is kind of similar to what we brought in Express over here, but then we just had the full Express app. And over here we just have what's called a router. And again, that's just for the purpose of Express routes. And then kind of at the bottom, I'm going to do an export. And my syntax for this, I like router as pet owner router. And so we can kind of have a named export here, naming our router variable pet owner router. And that kind of sets us up here to have some routes. And so you can set a router.get and I'm just going to say get all pet owners. Okay, so if I hit this method, right, if I hit this route, it has an anonymous callback function here that sends back to the client get all pet owners. And so this is just going to kind of test that we can get here, okay, get to this route by linking this index file to the router. And so that's what we have to do next over here. Now to basically bring in that router, we're going to do that with an import statement. Import pet owner router, and let's see, this says current directory routes /API /pet owner JS. Okay, that path, this is a relative path from the root directory to get to my pet owner JS module, and that looks good. Then we're ready to use this pet owner router. I like to put these at the bottom of my file here because the order of these middleware calls, if you were to put this up at the top, it wouldn't work. So the order of middleware calls are definitely important. So you have to use all these middlewares first, and then you want to link up your router. So here, I'm going to change my URL. So this is actually the beginning of the URL, app.use/API/pet owners. And I want to make this a hyphenated pet -owners. And so that's one of those best practices to do the hyphenated between your on your routes for RESTful APIs. Okay, so there's a lot of best practices to go into that. So if I want to go to API/pet owners, this will respond with all of my pet owners. So the way that this ends up working together is kind of like string concatenation. You concatenate that string along with this one. Now I actually like to leave this one blank. And so basically by hitting this right here, it will return all of the pet owners from our database. And so we have to wire up our database. Right now we don't have a database, so we're just going to respond res dot, we could say JSON, res dot, doesn't even matter. Let's just do a res send. Okay. So, we're just linking up our routers, and we're going to test this route with Postman. And so let's boot this up. npm run, this is our backend start dev script, and see that it boots up, which is good. Okay, now we can use Postman to test that route. And Once you've logged in here to Postman, these are all referred to as collections, and in the collections we have requests, and this is going to allow us to make HTTP get and post and get delete requests, all these kinds of things. So we're going to start off by creating a new collection, and so you're going to want to do this blank collection. I'm going to call this my tail runner demo. Okay, and so the first request to make is a get request, and so here we can add a request. I just click this 3 button here, add a request to tail runner demo, and this is where I can type in http:// this is basically right, localhost. I've done this before, so it's kind of auto-filling, but it's not port 2024. What port are we on? Let me look here. We're on port 4000 /API/pet-owners. And if I hit send, notice it does return get all pet owners. Okay, so my routing is set up properly. Let's go ahead and save this request and Control S, and I don't want to call it new request. I want to rename that to get all pet owners. Okay, and that's cool, but we actually want to get our pet owners from the database. So now's a good time to go ahead and create the database and link the database to our Express server. Like link that database backend into our Express server. Okay, so the next step is to actually create the database, and we're going to do that with Mongo Compass. So hopefully you've already installed Mongo Compass, and log in with your MongoDB.com credentials. Now, the most confusing part the biggest mistake that I see all the time on MongoDB is there's actually a couple sets of usernames and passwords. Now, when I log into MongoDB.com, okay, that's one username and password, which is a different username and password to actually authenticate to my database. Okay, so let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to go ahead and sign in. Obviously, you're going to want to do the same. And this is signing into Mongo Atlas, and so that's kind of the first part, is being able to sign into Mongo Atlas, MongoDB.com in other words. Now, once you're signed in, you need to make a cluster. Okay, and so your screen probably doesn't look like mine. If I kind of go home, I already have these different clusters created. And so a cluster is just kind of what it sounds like. It's multiple servers that are redundant, so that if one server were to crash, you don't lose your data. And when you sign up for Mongo Atlas, you can obviously pay for things, or you can just use the free clusters. And so to walk through, let's see if I can go to all clusters. There is a series of steps to create a free cluster. And because I've already done it, I'm trying to at least get you to the wizard. Let me just say, if I were to hit a new project, and maybe that's where it's going to be. So if I hit new project, and this is just demo project, Okay, and this is my Atlas username, so this is automatically going to be my username for the database. And so remember, I was getting at there's two sets of credentials, one for the website and one for the database. This is going to be my username for the database. Now if I just create this project, okay, here we go. We had to create a project first, and now we can create a cluster. And this is the settings. You're going to select this free tier. Okay, we can call it cluster 0. You can select your cloud provider, and you can select whatever's closest to you, whatever region is closest to you, and then you create deployment. Okay, now I'm not going to do this because I don't need it, but I just wanted to show that in the process. Now if I back up, because I don't want to do this, okay, once you have a cluster, all right, there's settings that again are just common mistakes. Here my demo project, notice I don't have a database user because I didn't finish that wizard. But this database user, okay, under this link right here, this is what you're going to need, the username and password, when you're actually connecting from Node into Mongo. The username and password that's right here under add a new database user is the username and password that you will use to connect from your Express app into your Mongo cluster, okay, which can be a different username and password than mongoatlas.com, mongodb.com. Okay, so number one, you have to know your username and password here, and that's a common hang-up. The other part is actually granting correct network access. So you have to allow an IP address through the firewall. And notice here, I have this add IP address and allow access from the current IP address and click on confirm. So those are the two settings that are commonly hanging people up at this point. They don't have the right username and password for the database access, and they don't actually set up proper network firewall configuration. So you have to add this IP address here. Once you've done that, okay, I can kind of go back to my main, and once I'm on my main cluster, let's take a look at my actual databases. I'm going to create a database. So at this point, we're at the point where we can actually create. You can notice I have a username here, okay, that has kind of an administrator level, and I've set up network access for this to work properly. But if I kind of go back to, let's go overview, let's connect to my cluster. No, let's click on clusters here. Okay, now I can browse collections. All right, and we can see some different databases here. Okay, now you're not going to have these databases, but this is where we will create a database. And so I have this tail runner database. I'm just going to delete it because I'm going to recreate it here. Tail runner. Let's drop this database. Actually, no, I'm just going to create a separate one. I'm just going to create. Yeah, yes. Do I want to delete one? Let me think. I'm just going to create a separate one. It's not going to hurt. Tail runner demo. And again, whatever you're doing your CRUD operations on, I'm just doing it on pet owners. I'm not going to create any collection name. Well, I guess it wants me to. So I'll create a pet owners, plural. And we'll just go ahead and create that. Okay. So all I'm going to do, I've got a database now and a collection in my database, and I'm going to put a couple documents in there. And so I'm going to put a couple pet owners in my database. So let's just insert a document, and let's kind of go with this view here. If I leave the ID off, it will auto-generate an object ID. So this is just JSON now. So I'll go first name Okay, and all I've done is a first name, a last name, and let's do a pets array. So we're just gonna have a string array with 2 pets. So John Doe has 1 pet called Arnold and Bob. I'm just going to copy this document and okay, so we put in John Doe with 2 pets, and so our data is going to be real simple for this, but nonetheless we'll insert a second document, click on this view, let's do Jane. Okay, whatever Jane Doe's pets names are. Okay, so now we've created the database, we've created a collection, and we've put a couple of pet owners into that collection. And so it's real simple just to kind of get started on the database side. So the next thing to do, we're going to start actually connecting this in. So let's go back, now that we've got these documents put in. Let's go, where do we want to go? Let's go back, just click on Atlas, click on main. Okay, so now we need to connect in, and that's what the green connect button is going to do for us. And thankfully they tell you, well, how are you connecting? Are you connecting with Compass? Or are you connecting with your drivers, which are MongoDB drivers? So for right now, we have not connected with Compass or with drivers, but let me just click on Compass first. And notice we're going to copy the connection string to open the MongoDB Compass. So I'm going to copy that. And that brings me back here to Compass. Now, to connect into your cluster, all right, we're going to click plus, add new connection, and you're going to paste what you just copied there here, and this DB password, okay, this is insert password here. Okay, now you're going to notice I deleted the, if I kind of Control Z that, I did delete the angle brackets here, right? So definitely delete those angle brackets, the less than and greater than, and that should allow you to connect in via Compass. Okay, now I've already saved my credentials right here, so if I just click it, if you save this, notice I get the green check mark, and here's all my databases, and here's Tailrunner demo, and here's the 2 documents that I just created on Atlas, and now I'm just looking at it on Compass. Okay, so connect in Compass into your cluster, and the next thing to do is we're going to connect in using the drivers. So it's kind of the same thing. You're going to copy this connection string, but we're going to copy this connection string into a .env file. So if I click on copy here, it does look like there's some extra query string data there, so it looks a little longer to me on a glance, but it's the same process. We're going to have to put in our password for the database, not the password for Atlas, but or the cluster, the password for the cluster. So let's go back to here in our .env file, and I'm going to make 2 variables, and one's going to be my Mongo connection string, And I'm going to put this in a string, and I'm going to paste that in. Okay, now insert password here. Okay, obviously that's not my password. I'm going to make another variable called MongoDB name. Not Cogmo, Mongo. My hands have dyslexia this morning. MongoDB name. And this is going to go in quotes, and I'm going to go back to my database, and this is tail runner demo, capital T, capital R, capital D, tail. Let me go ahead and save that. Okay, so there's one more variable that I'll put in here, and then we're probably not coming back to this for a while. http://localhost 4000. I also have this domain variable, and so I'm going to pull this .env file off the screen so I can insert my actual password and not be public on the internet. But these are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 variables that we will wind up using. Yeah, let me pull this off the screen so I can put in my password. Copy, paste. Save it, close it. Okay, bring it back. Okay, so anytime you change your .env file, you can Control-C. You're going to want to reload that .env file. So I'll just stop my server and reboot it and figure out where to go next. Okay, so the next thing that I like to do is make a ping function to actually ping the database from our Express server. And I'm going to do that by making a database file. We're going to, just like we want our routes separate from our Express server, we're going to make a database module. And this is going to allow us to keep our database logic outside of our routes. So just all that separation of concerns. And we did install the MongoDB driver. Okay, so we already have that, so that allows us to import Mongo client and an object ID from the MongoDB driver. I'm also going to bring in the debug channel and a variable for our database connection. So let's bring in the debug channel for troubleshooting purposes, and notice I've got a _db variable equal to null. I'm going to start copying and pasting code, so you're going to have to pause and code this out. Okay, so here's a function called connect to database. You could see if the database variable is null, if it's falsy. If this database is falsy, let's create a connection string variable and a DB name. And these are coming from the env file. Process.env is how we access these variables in our env file. Now we did call this MongoDB name, but this one we called something different. I believe this was called Mongo_connection string. Let me double check my naming here. Mongo_connection string is correct. Okay, so this is just basically reading these variables out of our env file. We call the connect method using the connection string. And then we also initialize our database name, right? So we connect to the database, we initialize this variable, we return this variable. So here's a function called connect to database. And now I'm going to make a function called ping. Okay, underneath this one, let's make a function called ping. You can see ping calls that connect to database, and it just runs a ping command, and then it puts that ping command in the debug channel to kind of give us some sort of success. And then now we need to call the ping command. Okay, and the way to actually get this to run, okay, the way to actually call this ping command is we're going to export it and then import it on our index.js. And just by importing it in this other file, that will actually call that ping command when the program boots up. So we'll see how this works. So we're going to export. We really just want to export ping. And honestly, we just need to export something and import something to get this file to run. So there's exporting ping. And now on index, we're going to import ping. We can take that out eventually. Import ping from the current directory database.js. And there you see, we are now pinging our database using that debug channel. Now, if you're not getting this, you're probably getting a username and password error that you're going to have to go back onto Mongo Atlas and check your username and password, probably reset that password under your database access, right? You're going to edit this user and reset their password so that you can connect in and put that password in the connection string in your .env file. Okay, so that's a really common thing. But the main thing here is to go ahead and ping your database. And we've demonstrated doing that. Now, let's go ahead and write a function to get all of the pet owners inside of our database. So we can kind of collapse these functions. And here is a JavaScript function to get all of the pet owners. Notice we are initializing our database, and notice there's a difference between _db and here I'm just calling it db. Different variables, right? This database, this connected database is written in a pattern that we're only initializing _db once, a singleton pattern, if you will. Okay, and it returns _db, and then we store that _db in this db variable. That allows us to await db collection pet owners. Let's make sure that's our collection name. Capital P, capital O, pet owners. And this is kind of like a select star. This is finding all the pet owners. That returns a cursor, and then we convert that to an array. So notice this function just hits our database. And this is why I like the MongoDB driver, is that if you've ever written Mongo queries before, you know, find one, insert one, update one, all of those syntaxes there, you can basically write your code and write your find queries however you want to. This is pretty simple find queries, just finding all the documents in the pet owners collection. Okay, and returning this is an async function, and now we export it. Get all pet owners. Okay, now in our route, we need to import. Okay, we need to import that. So let's import get all pet owners. Now the pathing here is interesting. We have to go up 2 directories, and we need to work with database.js. You got to include that JS. If you don't put that JS on there, it won't work. So here, get all pet owners, and I'm going to try catch, and this is an async method, right? So I'll say const pet owners equals await get all pet owners. Now in order to await it, we need to mark this as async, and res status 200 JSON pet owners, catch. Okay, if there's any errors, we'll catch those errors. And in the process there, it wasn't happy with my code, so I got to reboot. And try missing a catch. Well, my catch is right there. Try catch. Close. Close. Okay. I just had to I had to save it. It probably wasn't saved. Control S. Okay, so now we should be able to go back to our same route that was just sending back some string before. And now we're able to get our pet owners connecting through Mongo driver and query our database. And so very good. So far, so good. All right. So what we're doing here is CRUD operations. And so, you know, if you want to view the get operation as reading pet owners, it's also a normal thing to get a single pet owner. So this is a read operation in the CRUD. We'll do another read operation where we get the pet owner by ID. And so I would start in the database module and write a get pet owner by ID. And so let's walk through this function. This function takes one input parameter of the ID. Okay, I'm going to refactor this a little bit. Maybe. Well, maybe not. There's another way to write this, but I can leave it at this. So this is an object ID. Like, notice all of our documents have object IDs, and object IDs are 24 characters in length. So if I say, hey, if it's not at least 24 characters, we kind of say it's not a valid ID, and we don't hit the database. Okay, and we just kind of say, you know, return an empty object. There's nothing to return if it's not a valid object ID. Otherwise, let's go ahead and do a find one operation instead of a find. We're going to take in that string ID and convert it to an object ID. So realize this variable here on line 31 is a string, and in order for it to hit a database and pull out an object ID, we have to convert that data type. Okay, we have to convert that string into an object ID. So we're going to find underscore ID, convert it to an object ID. That's what this new ID does. This new ID, by the way, we brought in that method right here on line 1. Okay, that will allow us to convert strings into object IDs, and we can debug that user, but nonetheless, we can just return that user. So little if else in there. Let's export that function, get pet owner by ID. So that backend pet owner, we can have our route to get the pet owner by ID. So this is another get route, but it has a route variable. Okay, this is not a static route, because it's this colon ID means that part of the route will be dynamic. The end user, the front end, will have to pass a dynamic ID in. Into this route. And so this is an async method. Here's our request and our response objects, the HTTP request and response that's going back and forth, server and client. We read the ID out of this variable. Okay, so this line right here reads the ID variable from the route. That's why that there on line 18 has to match the rec.params ID. So these two identifiers have to match. We got a try catch block where we're trying to get our owner from our database module. Right? We need to call this function in. Don't forget to import. So I'm going to say comma get pet owner by ID. right? Otherwise that function doesn't exist if you don't import it. And here I say if the owner is an empty string or the owner is null, we say owner not found. Otherwise we send back the owner. And if there's a database error, we just catch that server-side error and send that back. Okay, so what that will allow us to do is copy in this string, and I'm going to hit a new route. Localhost port 4000 API pet owners. And again, this is string concatenation, so it's just, hey, of all the pet owners, give me the one with that ID. And if I send that, got a little bit of troubleshooting to do here. Let me see, I took out all my debugs. And so let's put those debugs back in. Okay, so here if I save, maybe I just needed to save and reboot. Let's try it one more time. Okay, I just had to save my code. This is allowing us to get this pet owner. Notice if I send in an ID that's too short, we say owner not found, or if I just make something up, it says owner not found. So if we pass in a valid object ID, we get that pet owner back. Here's Jane. Okay, but if we send in anything else, there is no owner, we get object not found. Now I'm going to save this, Control S this request, and save it to the right collection here. I call this TR demo, and my request name is get owner by ID. Click on save. You definitely want to save these requests. That way you can close them and then open them back up individually and run them individually. Okay, so it's always a good idea to save your requests and just makes them fast to run and call on them again. All right, so those are two read operations that we can do on our pet owners, all pet owners, and pet owner by ID. Let's go back to our database module. And now we can do an add pet owner. Okay, so if we want to add a pet owner, that's going to be done. Notice instead of a HTTP GET method, this will be a POST method. So let's go to the add pet owner. So let's start before we get to the route. Let's write the database. So inside a database. Okay, here's our function. Now here we're passing in the entire object, the entire owner object, and we run an insert one. And again, maybe we put a try catch around this because anytime you're connecting to a database, that's a good practice, but not being done here. Now this insert one command returns an object, okay, and we have to await it. And that's why it's an async function. This returns an object from the database, and that's going to say, you know, whether it was successful or not. So just realize that this DB result is an object that's going to have properties on it, and it's going to tell you about the operation. This is kind of like a DB result operation. Was this add successful or not? So this doesn't actually send back the owner. It sends back a database result object. Okay, so let's export it. Let's go back here and import it. And then let's take a look at our route. Now the main difference here is that we're doing a post instead of we're doing a post method. So here on line 33, notice the other ones were routers.get. Well, router.post, this HTTP method, post, is for adding new entities. And so, you know, we're making a RESTful API here and following some good practices for building out RESTful APIs and all the good URLs. So if we just post, basically, if we do a post to this API pet owners, it's going to add another pet owner. we're going to accept the owner from the front end, from the body of the front end. And then we say, hey, if you don't have a first name, a last name, or some dogs, if there's no dogs, then let's say, hey, that's not valid. Otherwise, if you've got all the good data, let's call our function to add a pet owner, try catch. And the status message that we're going to send back is 201. We're just going to say, hey, you can just say, we're not even using that database object. Notice here on line 40, I'm not even using result. Really what you should do is you could say, if the result has a property that says the insert was successful, then you would send back new owner added. So you could just kind of look at that variable in a debug and write this a little bit better. But nonetheless, if you make it here, we're just gonna send back. We're gonna assume it worked, which is not. It will work, but really you want to check it a little deeper. Okay, so how are we going to send this across? We need a first name, a last name, and we need some dogs. So there's a few things to send over on Postman. And here, I'll just add the request this way now. So it puts it in that collection. And right away, I'm going to change this to a post. HTTP : localhost 4000 API pet owners. So if I do a post, now the way to send this from Postman, okay, which is going to be a little different than how we send it from React here in a little bit, but to send it from Postman, we're going to go into the body, right, because that's how it's going to be received in the rec.body, and then the form encoded. And so we're looking for a first name, a last name, and to have an array of dogs, again lowercase d, dogs, we'll just do dogs, dogs, dogs. So I'll say Jason, last name Keltz, and doggy1, doggy2, doggy3. And if I send that, it does say new owner added. If I go back to get all pet owners, again, this is reading out of the database. And so you can see there that we are now reading out of the database. I can show you from here. If I refresh my database inside of Compass, now you can see that my add new owner is working. Okay, so flying right through this and testing it in Postman, we've got reading all pet owners, single pet owner, adding a new pet owner. The more challenging code to write is typically an update. But let's go through the update. So in update, I'll write a function called update pet owner. We're going to accept the updated owner in the parameter, connect to the database. We're going to do an update one operation on our pet owners collection. And in this update one, the first part is what owner are we updating? So this is a query to select the owner by its owner ID. And then we say $set the updated owner. Okay, so we need to send the updated owner information into this function from our route. So let's export that function, update pet owner. And in the route now, this is going to be done with a patch. And so if you are updating just a part, of an object, that updates a patch method, a patch verb, a HTTP patch. Okay, so this update operation, this is the longer one, and I will admit I should probably have looked at this to condense it down. think it's a little verbose, a little heavy on the code. I probably could have simplified this code quite a bit. But let's walk through it. So here we're running a patch operation. Okay. When we go to patch, and this is a dynamic route. So let's read that ID. Let's read that from the route variable. Let's get the owner by the ID. So the current owner, we're hitting the database and getting the current owner. Right away, I just kind of empty out the dogs. If the current owner has dogs, I empty out those dogs. I kind of reset their dogs to nothing. I could see where that would be problematic. So let me finish thinking through this through. Kind of the same thing before. If it's not a valid object ID, we kind of have this, hey, if the current owner is empty or null, we say not found. So if it's not a good ID from the database, right away, current owner, we say owner not found. We get our updated owner from rec.body. And if there are dogs, and if there's a bunch of dogs sent over an array, we loop through over that array and then push each individual dog. So we for each over that dog's array and push that into our empty array. So each dog will be added. Otherwise, if it's just a string, a single dog, then we update that one dog. So if there's a bunch of dogs, we push it onto the array. Otherwise, we just push that one dog. If it's a string, now there is a case where you don't, you might not want to delete the dogs that are currently there, right? So I'm going to take that out. I'm going to move that, and I'm only going to update. Let me Control Z. I'm not going to, only if there are dogs sent across am I going to update the dogs array. Okay, but if there are no dogs sent across, we could just keep the dogs that are in there. So that should work just by moving that line down. If there are updated owner dogs, then we send those across. Okay. Now, if there's an updated owner first name, then we update the current owner first name. If there's an updated owner last name, we update the current owner last name. So what we're doing is we're checking for an update and then applying that update to the current owner if there's an update. And then we send the current owner back into our function. We try catch it. Again, we're not really using this result object. I think I should, but in the results, in this case, I'm not. And here, we're just sending a success message, owner updated, otherwise sending an error. Control save. So that's my updated logic. I definitely could shorten that up, but for now that should do the trick. And let's make that patch. So that's my post. Let's make my patch. New request. That is a patch. Localhost 4000 API pet owners, and let's just patch Jason Keltz. And so I'm going to put that ID here. Again, just kind of matching the route, patching, adding in the ID. I'm going to click on body, form encoded. Let's say first name. Change this first name to whatever, Jazz. Okay. And so, make sure I've saved everything. Save. And I'm getting an empty object back. Let me see, just to make sure that did not run. So it did not update. Let me click save and can troubleshoot this kind of live. So let's just make sure that his ID is right. send. So how do we troubleshoot this? This is good to kind of troubleshoot. We're going to use that debug. So the first thing is, am I getting my current owner? So I'm going to say debug. I don't have a debugger brought in. So let's bring in a debugger, a channel, if you will, up at the top of this file. Haven't had to troubleshoot anything yet. So let's bring in debug. Call this debug pet owner. And then this is pet owner. So our channel, go right here. And then we call this function right here, debug pet owner, current owner, and JSON. Okay. So when we patch this, we get the owner by its ID. Let's just spit it back out at the prompt. Okay, so we are getting Jason Keltz, and Jason Keltz has dogs. And let's now debug pet owner, the updated owner. So if we get to this else block, it'll spit out my updated owner. And hit that. It is getting my updated owner. So if it has dogs, this should not run because he doesn't have dogs. And so let's see if we're making it here. Debug pet owner, and we'll spit out the current owner here if we make it to line 85. Okay, so line 85 says current owner, and it does change his name to Jazz Keltz, and it has dogs. Okay, so we are getting to line 85, and here update pet owner with the current owner. So that means we're making it to our database module. And updated owner has an underscore ID. So let's just debug here in the database. So in the database, our updated owner looks like that. Okay, so I'm noticing update pet owner, line 51 never ran. So this is pretty common. You just sprinkle in debugs everywhere. And for whatever reason, oh, I bet you I didn't await it. So let me go back here. Nope, sure did. And I didn't import my update pet owner. So I had a little tilde right here that it was like it didn't know what that function was. So in order to call this function, I would have expected that to break harder, but basically I didn't import that function, and therefore I couldn't run that function. Now if I run it, now it says owner updated, and now I got Jazz Keltz, and I didn't delete his dogs, which is good. And so kind of go back here, and let's just say dogs, and we'll just say D1 and D2. So this should update our owner. And now instead of doggy 1, doggy 2, and doggy 3, it should just be D1 and D2. So we demonstrated updating the first name, updated the dogs, and that's kind of working as intended. If I just send a single dog across, that should still work. We should still have a single array of dogs. Cool. And so let's save this, and this new request, you can update the name here. I'll call it update dog owner. So there's reading, there's creating, there's updating, and last but not least is delete. And so update's always the trickiest one. Deleting should be a little bit easier. Okay, start with our function in the database. All right, we're going to just pass in the ID of our pet owner and just run a delete one operation. So as long as it's a good ID. Now let's kind of empty out our debugs. We don't need those debugs anymore on the patch. As you fix the problems, it's always good to start getting rid of those debugs if you don't need them. I'm just kind of glancing at my delete. Maybe kind of similar to before. We want to validate that ID in a little bit of way, right? So I can maybe do an if else on my delete. And if it's not at least 24 characters, we just send back an empty object. We don't need that debug there. And we don't need that debug up there either. And so you send in a string, and if it's not 24 characters, we just return an empty object. And then that way, back in our routes, let's condense the patch. And what we have left is a router.delete, send in the ID, and I'm going to bring in this if statement from the get pet owner by ID, where if the database sends back an empty object, or it's null, or the owner is falsy. So let's go back to our delete. Oh, actually here I kind of handled it a different way. I said if the database result deleted count is 0, object not found, otherwise owner deleted. And so if that just sends back, so if that sends back an empty object, we do need to handle that case. So if result is an empty string or result is null, res status owner not found. Let me clean this up. Else if you get the database result back, okay. Otherwise, owner deleted, catch your 500 errors. Okay, all that's left is to test this delete operation on the back end before we build our front end. Let's bring in delete pet owner. This was a mistake I've made. Delete pet owner, and let's also make sure that we're exporting delete pet owner. Save that so the app boots up. So now let's test it. Let's get all pet owners. Jazz Celts. Let's add a delete request. Change that to delete. Send over that ID. It says owner deleted. If I send that again, the owner is gone. If I post a new owner, pet owner added, take a look at them, update them. So in this case, we're updating the first name and the dogs. If I go back here, first name and dogs has been updated, and we should be able to delete them now by that ID. Owner deleted, get all pet owner. Awesome. I just want to save this, request Control S, give it a name, delete pet owner, save it. And really that's kind of the extent of using Postman, just getting these backend routes to work before we actually tack on a front end, right? A lot easier to test these routes in Postman than it is to wire up React and then have to build out an entire front end. So that really concludes the back-end coding for now. Not to say that when we're coding out the front end, we won't come back into the front end, but really this gives us all the operations we need on our Express server to do CRUD operations. And so we kind of have everything we need set up for our back-end for now. And so what we have left to look forward to is building out that React front end, and that's coming up next. Moving right along, we get to build our front end app in React. And so let me go ahead and close all this back end code that I have. And as you're going to remember, we have this front end folder where we have this React template. And so this is where we're going to start working with. And if you kind of look at this template, there's a few dependencies that we have to install on the front end. And yes, the dependencies for the front end are a different list of dependencies than those on the back end. So we use different packages in the front end than the back end. So that's something to realize. And we're going to add a script as well. So down here I need a Control C to kind of stop my back end from running, clear the screen, and I'm going to go into my front end. That way when I'm installing dependencies, I'm installing them in the right place. And anytime I install dependencies, I close my package.json because I've seen that creating conflicts. I'm going to install the Axios dependency. That's going to allow me to make asynchronous calls to my backend from my front end. Is this tool called Axios. I'm going to install Bootstrap and Bootstrap icons and Boot Swatch for theming. So these last three are just all Bootstrap utilities. So Bootstrap itself, the icons for Bootstrap, and theming tools called Boot Swatch, which I'll go over that. So let's install those. Bring in all these dependencies. Now if I open up my package.json, I've got Axios Bootstrap icons, and Boot Swatch, collection of themes. Cool. Now I'm going to add one script here on my back end. This script, I'm going to call it build auto, and it's going to run the vite build command and watch. So what this allows us to do is, you know, when you run the build script, right? Notice it's the same command. But this allows us to watch any of our front-end JSX files, and anytime a JSX file runs, it automatically runs vite build. So basically, as we're changing our front end, it's going to be changing all of the files in our dist folder for us. In other words, we're not going to have to run vite build because it's going to run it basically every time we save a JSX file. Okay, so that's the script we're going to run on the front end when we run our front end script. Now, at this point, I like to run the back end in one terminal window with the run dev, npm run start dev. So this is going to run our back end. And by the way, real quick, I just cd ... goes up a directory. So we were in the front end, cd ... took me up to my root directory, which is just the tr folder. npm run start -dev. Okay, so that kind of gets my back end going. And then I'm going to start up another terminal window. and I'm going to go into my front end. Now notice there's like two terminal windows here. This one's running my back end. This one's now going into my front end. And I'm going to do npm run build auto. Okay, so I've got these two terminal windows, and you could see by running this build auto script, it already kind of recompiled my dist folder for me. And that's really what I want, because now if I kind of boot up localhost 4000, it says hello from my front end. Just to demonstrate how this is going to work, if I go into my JSX file, hello from my front end, ... I'm going to hit Control S. Watch what happens when I save, right? As soon as I hit Control S, it retransforms my dist folder. Now, back here, if I refresh, notice, there you go. So as I'm changing my JSX code and my components and all my front end, it's streamlining that process. All right. So React has components, and we're going to start building out these React components. And so what I like to do is I like to, in this source folder, I like to make a subfolder called components, not under assets. Getting these in the right place. Let's make under source components. I don't want it under assets though. Drag that into source. Okay, so notice under source, we've got components. And we're going to have two components here. And the first one is just going to list our, it's basically going to be our list of pet owners. And so in components, let's make a new file, pet owner list.jsx. And so to kind of start here, what do we need to bring in off the top? At a bare minimum, pet owner list equals no props to start. And then export pet owner list. Okay, so React has components, and components are functions that return some data. And so right now it's basically nothing, but let's expand on this and return our pet owner list. And so just to basically have a pet owner list component that has an H1 on it, that is a pet owner list. Maybe we'll just say pet owners. And then in our app JSX, we need to import it. Import pet owner list. And let's see if we got this pathing right. We need a .jsx file here. And in our return, instead of having an H1 there, we'll just say pet owner list. And if I refresh my front end, it says pet owners. Okay, cool. Now there's a lot of CSS that you get kind of out of the box here, and this just got things centered and whatever. Let me delete this import on app CSS. I'm not interested in the default styling. There's also here a main JSX, and I'm not interested in the CSS from that either. So there's two CSS files, basically deleting. And if I refresh, now we just got an H1 kind of default flow, and not any pre-built CSS. So the next thing is to maybe bring in Bootstrap, and I'm going to do that on my app JSX, or yeah, app JSX. So node modules. Okay, so in my front end, I got these node modules, and what I've learned is that, you know, I can bring in Bootstrap using a CDN, or I can link to it locally. And when I deploy to GCloud, as I do in this tutorial, GCloud's just nicer with local resources, like to linking to the Bootstrap CSS files here and the Bootstrap JavaScript files locally versus using CDNs. I've just had error messages when I try to use the CDN. So I like using local resources. And so Bootstrap has, you know, its own CSS and its own JavaScript. There's also Boot Swatch. And so Boot Swatch is Bootstrap themes. And so these themes, if you kind of see, just basically change the look and feel of your Bootstrap CSS. And so it's really easy to use Boot Swatch and change the look and feel, just change the CSS. And so I, you know, just for the sake of it, kind of have this this theme that I'm using called Vapor, and the name of the theme is pretty obvious, right? So if I click on Solar, you know, obviously that's the name of the theme. And so you can use whatever theme you want. If you're following along, you could use Sketchy, you know, it's whatever you want. I'm going to use Vapor. And so instead of using the default Bootstrap CSS, I'm going to use Vapor's CSS. It's all the same Bootstrap stuff, all the same Bootstrap components, just it looks a little different, right? So in order to use Vapor, right, so I need to go to Boot Swatch, and you can kind of see the dist folder, and then you have to select, you know, Vapor, and then there's your Bootstrap CSS for Vapor. And so the import statement looks like this. So we're importing, and this is node modules, dist, Vapor, Bootstrap minimized CSS. And then to get the JavaScript to work, I'm just going to use the JavaScript that's in the default Bootstrap folder. So the CSS we're changing from Boot Swatch, and the JavaScript we're pulling from node modules Bootstrap JavaScript. Okay, so kind of save that, and if I go back here, refresh, right away you see a different look and feel for our front end using Boot Swatch themes. So real easy to kind of bring in Boot Swatch. Okay, so the next thing is we need to start actually calling our backend routes and getting data. And when I coded this out, you know, in the past, you would think to store the pet owner list in the component, and that would work up until a point. And I've found that it's always easier to send data down. And so since app is the parent from pet owner list, you might need as we bring in this other component, we might need some of that list data in the other component as well. And so kind of my own learning journey was to first, let's store all the data here in pet owner list. But I've found it easier to kind of hoist the data up kind of to the root, right? And you would say that app is the parent of pet owner. And so in the hierarchy, this is the parent, this is the child. And then you send the data down to the pet owner list, but then you could also send that data down to other components. And so in my experience, I've found that it's easier to kind of hoist that data up. And of course, in React, we use React hooks to kind of store our data in variables. And so we got to start by bringing in some hooks. And so here there's a use state hook and there's a use effect hook. Use effect is to store our data, and use state is kind of used as a life cycle event on the component load and things like that. So we'll use both of these functions in different ways. So when it comes to using the use effect hook, right? Here's a use state hook. So here's our use state hook. And we're basically creating this variable called pet owners, and we're initializing it to an empty array. So our pet owners is an empty array by default. And then anytime you want to modify this array, you have to call set pet owners. Okay, so this is the use state hook. This is how you have a piece of data in React that is that different. It's no longer deterministic coding. One second, I gotta think of the right word. That was the word. I hit the docs. React is considered, and you can kind of see here, React is considered declarative. You focus on what the UI should look like for a given state, not how to update the DOM step by step. So you're more or less focusing on, call it data-driven UIs, as opposed to how to manually update the DOM like you do in vanilla JavaScript. So React is considered declarative. Because of that, we have these hooks like pet owners, use state hook. And so again, kind of what I do here is I send pet owners down. So here, when this is going to load, when app loads, I'm basically going to hit my backend and load up my pet owners. So we're going to call our backend here, and this is going to require me to use the use effect hook. Okay, now this use effect hook is going to go underneath here. I'm going to paste this in. I don't have a refresh variable, and I got to bring in Axios. So let me walk through this code and update this path. So this is http://localhost 4000 API pet owners. So notice my GET request via Axios is calling my backend API pet owners. We're storing it in this variable called data. We're logging the data, and then we're calling set pet owners. That is the data coming from my backend. So set pet owners is being called on the component load, essentially. Now this is a function here that's an async function, and then we have to call that function right here. So notice we make the function inside of useEffect, and then we call it. And I don't know that it makes sense to await it or not. I didn't do that the first time, and I'll explain this second set of brackets here in a little bit, but nonetheless, this should populate our pet owners, and then we're going to send those pet owners down. So we're going to say pet owners equals pet owners. Okay, so this is how we're able to send data through what are called prompts. And so our variable called pet owners is going to hold our data, and our data is going to be sent down to this component through what is referred to as props. We get to make up this property name, because these components, we get to make up their names. And when we get to make the element names, and we get to make up their property names. So here we're calling this the pet owners. It's pretty normal to set the property name equal to the variable name. So it's the property name on the left, the variable name on the right. So we send the pet owners down, but I also need to bring in Axios for this to work. Import Axios from Axios. That's going to allow this asynchronous method call from Axios to work. Okay, so now that the data would be retrieved at the app level and sent down to the pet owner list, we need to receive that data, and we do that with object destructuring. So this is an object, and we're going to say pet owners. And now we have an array of pet owners that we can loop over. So we're going to loop over our array, and I'm going to return this out. Now I'm going to spit out a lot of HTML, and let me see how I want to bring this in here. For now, I'm going to start right here. It's going to start. Okay. So really all I've done is I've brought in a bootstrap row. Okay, I'm going to walk through all of this, comment out the things that I are not relevant yet. So these two buttons, kind of commented out these two buttons. We don't need them. And I'm kind of getting a red squiggly, but that's just a linter problem. It's if I configure my linter properly, I wouldn't get that red squiggly, and this code should work. So I'm not too worried about these red squigglies at the moment. Again, it's just a linter problem. So again, in our pet owner list, we receive an array of objects, and here, this return statement, we basically have a bootstrap row. So we're using the grid system. And for each pet owner, we're going to loop over the pet owners, plural. And for each of the pet owners, singular, okay, for each pet owner, when you're mapping, the root element of the map has to have a unique key. So there's a key property where we're saying, hey, this pet owner ID, this particular ID for this pet owner has to be put into a key. So that's kind of inside the row, we've got a call, and we have to mark that with a key. And then for each pet owner, basically, if you kind of see there, we're putting it inside of a card. Okay, so this is a bootstrap card, and this class name is how we do CSS classes in React. And so instead of the class attribute in React, it becomes class name, because class is a reserved word in JavaScript and it's a conflict. So you can't use class, you have to use class name. So basically, each pet owner is put into a bootstrap card. In each card, there's a card body, and we put the pet owner's first name and the pet owner's last name. And then we loop over the dogs. If the pet owner has dogs, we put each dog, which is just a string, we put each dog into a badge. Okay, so inside the card we have badges. We're going to have a couple buttons for editing and deleting, but we commented that out. Close the div, close the card body, close the card, close the column, close the the JavaScript, right? So here on line 6, this is why JSX is what it is. We can kind of mix our HTML with our JavaScript. So when you see these curly braces in our JSX files that kind of end on line 28 here, this is JSX, not just HTML, where you're mixing JavaScript and HTML. You close that div, and there has to be one parent here inside of this return. So there has to be one root parent. So that's an important factor. And let's save that up and see if we are in fact getting our pet owners. And if I inspect console, okay, so we are getting an error. Now notice here, we're getting some data from our database, which is great. But it's not being sent down properly because in our child component, it can't map over our array. It says undefined. And so let me look here. That says pet owners. If I go back here, capital O, capital O. Pet owner list. Let me clear and refresh, just make sure. Yeah, my data is not being, even though here, this console log is right here. So this sets the pet owners right here. And then pet owners is set down. Pet owners, pet owners. Let me pause and troubleshoot a little bit. Took a little bit of troubleshooting, but figured it out. In my database, I'm calling it pets. P-E-T-S, and so the pets array, before I didn't call it pets, I called it the dogs, so pet owner dot pets. I thought the mapping was having a hard time with pet owners, and so I kind of added that was unnecessary. So the change that was necessary for each pets dot map, we're going to map the pet. This becomes pet and pet, control save, and if I clear that console and refresh, now we've got John Doe and Jane Doe with their pets and pills. So we are reading out of the database, throwing that into a React front end, and we are well on our way. Now it probably makes sense to add a little container, right? So maybe above here, let's add a little bootstrap div class name of container. Okay, and then close that at the very bottom. So that closes the row. That closes the container. That div closes the row, that div closes the container. We can kind of wire that up properly. Let's get a little spacing here. Okay, so now we get a little bit of centering going on. And we are reading data. Okay, so now it kind of brings us back to in app.jsx. We got this little array right here inside of use effect, and so this is this hook runs when the component loads, and really when this hook runs is controlled by this second argument here. The first argument in this object is what code runs, and then the second argument is when it runs. And so when do we want our list to kind of hit the database again and get a new list? Well, it turns out anytime you're deleting something, you want the new list that doesn't have that entity in there if you're updating something. So there's a couple of operations where you want this hook to run again. And one way that you can get that to happen, that I like this approach, is by triggering a refresh using this refresh hook, use state hook. And so you basically start a refresh variable, and anytime you update the state, you update this refresh variable. Now you put this refresh hook in right here, and then anytime you call set refresh, it's going to cause this function to run again. So anytime this state is modified, it basically reloads our list. And again, anytime you delete something, you need to reload your list. Anytime you edit something, you need to reload your list. So we will call set refresh anytime delete or edit operations happen. Or add. Of course, you add a new user, which is where I'm going. We're also going to want to refresh our list. And so this is just kind of a nice way to reload our list anytime this variable changes. And so it also, kind of makes us jump into our next component. This component is our list, but we need a form to allow the end user to kind of post data, new pet owners. And so we need different controls other than our list. Let me kind of close that. So I've got app.jsx here, pet owner. I'm going to make another new component here. And this is my pet owner form. So here, pet owner form, JSX. Now this one form, because it's the same controls, can be used for doing both adding new owners and editing owners. And so we get some code reusability here by reusing the same form to do an add operation or an edit operation. And so, that kind of makes, some if-else statements. If it's a new operation, you show some things, else you just show some other things. And so, we're going to have to code for that. We're going to have to code for if it's a new add new pet owner, we show some things, else we're doing an edit operation. At the top here, let's import our hooks. So we're definitely going to need use state and a use effect from React. We're also going to bring in Axios, const pet owner form. And you can kind of see it's already knowing that we're going to need to pass in the set refresh. So like when we add a new user, we'll call that. And in here, there's a little return. And for now, we'll just return pet owner form. Just wire this up is all I'm going to do. Pet owner form. And then we have to export it. Okay, so now over here, import pet owner form, and underneath the list we will bring in pet owner form. We're going to send down the set refresh, and we're going to put the form right underneath the list. Okay, so probably if this were more real world, you would start bringing in React routers and having these on different pages, at least visually on different pages, even though React is a single page application. For now, we're just going to have our list on top of our form. We're going to send down set refresh. And that brings us back to our pet owner form. Now, if we're going to create new pet owners, okay, we need hooks for each one of the fields. There's different ways to do this, but a simple way is to have one hook for each field. We've got a first name, last name property. We have an array of dogs. And let's use effect. Okay. So here, let's just set last name for now to an empty, set first name to empty. So when the form loads, we're just setting all of these hooks to empty strings. Okay. So right now we're just going to start with the create new, right? We're just going to say create new. And this use effect sets all those hooks to empty strings. And now let's code up the form. So a little bit of HTML. And I'm going to just copy paste the HTML, make a couple changes. So you're going to definitely need to code this HTML, pause the video, get it all on the screen here, and I'll walk through what's going on. Okay, so let me get rid of this. Just call this pet owner form. And I'll get rid of this. I'll just say save. Okay, so at this point, this is the HTML that we can code. This is a pretty standard HTML form. There's not too much that's unique here. Notice when I submit, when I click the save button, which this is a submit button down here at the bottom that just says save. When I click this button, it's going to run this function. We haven't coded this function. That's why you're getting that red squiggly. And then we've got standard form controls, and all these form controls are text boxes, right? Input type of text. See, all these are just HTML text boxes. They're bootstrap form controls, okay? And this is the interesting line of code that when they, first off, you're seeing the first name hook, right? So this value of this text box is the first name hook. So it's an empty string until the user changes it. Then whenever the user types, it's being saved into the first name hook, right? So this attribute and this attribute, HTML on change attribute and the value attribute are being used together to kind of populate all of these hooks for all of our fields. Okay, pretty much the same line of code for last name, same line of code for the dogs. Okay, and so basically this form loads, all of our data is empty until the user starts to fill it in. On the HTML form, we got a submit button that says save, and now we need to actually write our function called handle submit. So that's going to be done right here. Handle submit, and it is an async function. And the first thing to do is cancel e.prevent default. Okay, this is kind of stopping the default JavaScript form submission to run our code instead. Okay, and what I do is I start our dogs off at empty array, and if there's a dog, if dog 1 is truthy, then we push that string onto our dogs array. And now we are ready to try and catch a little bit of code. So our try is going to hit our Axios. We're going to await Axios.post pet owners, comma, and this is where we construct our object that the front end is sending over the first name. This is our hook. This is our last name hook and our dog's hook. So here's our call to the backend API, and here's the object that we're sending it. And 1 second as I look at then I'm going to do I'm going to call set refresh, which is the function that we wrote to just be previous plus 1. So that takes the previous value, which is 0, and returns 0 plus 1. So it just increases our refresh by 1. And if we catch, handle any errors, I'm just going to catch parentheses error and console log our error. Okay. So set refresh should then reload our list. And a lot of code, but if I refresh, now we've got a pet owner form. And I always use Bob Marley as my example, and Marley Jr. is his dog. Now if I kind of look at the console, and I click save. Okay, I think it's a similar error to before. It's having a hard time mapping over something. Probably it's the same error as before, that I was once calling something dogs and now I'm calling something pets. And so here let's change this from dogs to pets. Save that, clear it, refresh it, and these are the IDs. Okay, so I can see when I did this insert, I inserted a dog's property and it can't. So I got a problem with my data here. And again, the problem is I did an insert and I called the property something different. I called it dog. So I got to go into my database and I'm just going to do a manual delete of this bad data. Okay, so that user's now gone. I can clear that out. Okay. And again, now I'm calling this pet, so I kind of fixed that problem. And if I go back now, okay, we got a clean console. And if I do a Bob Marley Jr., and I click on save, let's see what breaks now. And so it's having a hard time with Axios. Bad request response, invalid request it says. So we're getting, if I refresh, okay, refresh here, this time the data did not get put in. Let's troubleshoot. So sometimes I don't know whether it's right to troubleshoot live or on pause, but I'm going to troubleshoot this one live a little bit more. Seems to me that it's getting to the back end. And so I can kind of see here, if I save, I'm logging out my object. Bob Marley has 2 pets, a pets property with an array of 2 strings. So it seems to me that the front end is sending the data to the back end, but the back end sending back is responding with the bad request. So let's go to my back end and kind of log out the post. So it should be receiving a, let's kind of scroll up. And this is my pet owner on the back end. And so here's a post, and the owner is rec.body. Now, oh, owner.dogs. There it is, owner.pets. So on my back end, again, just the same problem over and over, but called it dogs versus pets. So this was triggering this response, because I didn't have a dogs, I have pets now coming from the front end. So if I Control S, save that on the back end, that should reboot that reboots my server on the back end. And back to the front end now, kind of clear that out, hit save, aha, and now Bob Marley with his 2 dogs is in our list. So again, just because you're done with the back end, you know, you're never done. It's just, you got to figure out whether you're troubleshooting the front end code or the back end code, and which is right. Okay, so we are reading and we are updating. I'm sorry, inserting. So again, the harder one is the update, and again, we're going to reuse this pet owner form for both an add and an edit. So in order to edit, you know, typically what you can do is add a little edit button here for John Doe, and then you click the edit button and it populates the form with his information. So for that, let's go ahead and go back to our list, because on our list we have to be able to click an edit button. So we can close our backend code. There's our form. Here's our list. Okay, now on our list we need to start having some hooks. So we're going to import use state from React, and I'm also going to import the pencil from, and this is a bootstrap icon. So I'm navigating to .. node modules, bootstrap icons. I'm navigating to the SVG image file that is a bootstrap pencil. Okay, now again, we installed bootstrap icons as a dependency. So this allows us to use bootstrap icons. And down here, I have an edit button. So if I bring that back, Control / to uncomment that, here's an HTML button that on click, we call this handle edit function, and set a pet owner. So handle edit is a function that I wrote in app.jsx, and let me write this function over here under refresh. I write a function called handle edit that takes a pet owner And really what I want to do is you need to select the owner, right? So I make a hook for the owner, const current owner, set current owner, and we started off with null. And anytime we handle an edit, we're just setting the current owner to the pet owner. Okay, so anytime we call this function, we're just basically putting data into our hook that is our current owner. And then we can send that current owner down into the form, right? Because we need the current owner information in the form. Current owner equals current owner. We need to populate the form with that current owner's data. So here we call handle edit on the form. We need to accept that prop. Which is the current owner. So we're accepting the current owner. And so now this is for the adding a new owner. I'm gonna write an if else in here on this use effect. I'm gonna say if there's a current owner, this is going to be an edit operation. Else, we do else, this is an add operation. So if there's a current owner, then we're going to call our setters. We're going to set the current owner's first name, set their last name, set their dogs if they exist, right? So if there's a current owner, set their first name, otherwise empty string. Okay, so there might not be a dog sub 1 and a dog sub 2. So this is just a little, if there's a by the way, pets, let's refactor that right away. Catch that before it becomes an issue. Cool. So if there's a current owner, then we set those fields. By setting these here, you'll see the data in the form. Okay, now it's also the case that anytime the current owner changes, you want to rerun this use effect. Anytime current owner changes, if the user selects different owners, you want to populate those fields with those different owners. Okay, so we're getting somewhere here. Back on pet owner list though, we need to receive handle edit. And so this is another prop, doesn't matter. We'll do handle edit. Again, handle edit just really selects the owner. So when we click this edit button, it is setting the owner. And then when you set the owner, it's going to put that owner information in the form. And here's how we're going to use that pencil, that bootstrap icon. So I just have an image that is the source of the image is that pencil, that SVG file, and a little text that says edit. Let's see how this looks. Okay, so here's our edit button, and not quite functioning yet. It says on click T is not a function, so let's clear that out and click edit. All right, so let's troubleshoot this. Okay. I see, I made the function here, handle edit, but I never sent it down to the form. So it was calling a function, but it was never sent down. So I need to say handle edit equals handle edit. Save that, and I got a little console log now when I click that button. So now if I clear the console, fixed you. Maybe I refresh, edit, not yet. Oh, handle edit is received on the list, not the form. We're not using it there, I'm just sending it to the wrong place. Okay, pet owner list, let's move that to the right place. Handle edit goes to the list. Because on the list, we receive handle edit, we click the button, we clear the console, we click edit, refresh, and there we go. Okay, so now we can click edit, we got Jane, okay, click edit, and we got Bob, okay? So we're selecting it when we click this edit button, and we got that going well. Could probably get rid of that console log now that the troubleshooting is no longer needed. All right, now we're getting somewhere. On the form, we are ready to make changes and save those changes. So back on the form, right now when we click save, all we're doing is an add. But we have this current owner variable now. We could say, hey, if there's a current owner, we need to do an edit. Otherwise, we do a save. Very similar to what we did in this use effect. We're going to do this on the submit. And so after our conditionals here, we could say, hey, if there's a current owner, else do this. Okay, now this else becomes an add new owner, and this if is update existing owner. And so the update operation, we will hit our local host. Let's get this pets. So let's hit our axios.patch. And what is our route? HTTP // localhost 4000 API pet owners. Now we have to send the current owner's ID. So there should be a current owner ID. Again, that object was set. Underscore ID is the object ID. And after we patch, I think all we need to do is set the refresh, but let me look at something. Okay, another thing we want to do is set the current owner to null. So I'm going to do the same set refresh. Okay. And I'm going to also set the current owner to null. So I need to receive in my pet owner form, I'm going to say set current owner equal to, I'm going to set current owner. I'm going to send that down and receive it here. Set current owner and whoop. Sorry, wrong. Keep getting that wrong. This is on the form. Set current owner. Let's make sure it's on the form. It's on the form. Send it down. Set current owner. So here we call set refresh. I'm going to set current owner to null. Okay. Let's get that front end up and running. Let's see what breaks. Again, a lot of code can break here. So let's edit Bob Marley. We got that. So far, so good. Call that Marley Jr. 22. Save. Now, didn't show that, but if I refresh, okay. So doesn't really seem to have worked. If I refresh my data here, yeah. So edit 22. So let's check on our backend. So here, this is adding a new owner. Here's our patch API owners, set the current ID, sending that to our backend. Unsaved code maybe? If I just save my code, let's just try again. Let me edit you. Okay, no. Okay, so okay. So let's spin up our backend because it looks like I'm not getting any error message jumping out at me. So pet owner. So let's go to the patch. And let's get our current owner. So if I put 22 on the dog and I save it, okay, so we're not sending 22 across. Okay, so let's go to, so the front end is not sending, okay, you click the button, pets is empty. Pets.push, dog 1, dog 2. Let's console log. So the backend isn't receiving that properly. So let's just throw that out there. Clear this out. I need to clear out all my console logs. Little troubleshooting. Update, save, clicked. Okay. Hopefully you guys find the live troubleshooting somewhat useful. Console 22. Okay. Okay. So now we get doing that right, and so here pets is being sent to the backend right. First name Marley Jr. Jr. 22. It's not getting the first name. That's interesting. Okay. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna pause and clean up all these console logs. I don't need all this. And also figure out why my first name and last name, noticing right here, update, save, click, it's just getting the pets. For whatever reason, it's missing first name, last name. Assumingly, it's also missing the current owner ID. So I'm gonna clean this up just a little bit. Be right back. All right, so in my troubleshooting, I was trying to simplify my code a little bit by setting this current owner to null. And there was another function I was trying to avoid writing, but I'm going to go ahead and bring this in. That'll set the current owner to null. I think that might be part of my problem. And so in app.jsx, I'm going to write another function. I got handle edit. I'm going to have I think the names could be better written here. So const handle save and handle save will set the refresh and set the current owner to null. And I will pass handle save down to my pet owner form. I no longer then need to pass this mutator set current owner down, because I'm going to basically call it here. So I can take that line of code out, set current owner. So let's get rid of set current owner here and bring in handle save. Okay, and here we'll just call handle save. And again, that changes the refresh and sets the current owner. Okay, now let's see what's broken. Okay, bring the web app back up. Go to the console. Not much going on there. Let's change a first name. Okay, that's working. And let's change a dog. Okay. So it's some combination. I get the first names being edited. Put 2 B's on Bob. That's not a problem. But if I change one of his pets, that's not going in. So I'm smiling because it burned me again. Here on my back end, I'm still using the dogs. So if updated owner dot pets, same problem getting me each time. Now that remains dog. If you refactor it to pet, you call it pet, that's fine. And okay, so refactor that on my back end to change that. So again, kind of go into my front end, clear it out. Should, if I didn't break anything, change his name back to Bob, no problem. Now if I edit his dog, now I got the back end playing nice. Okay. I don't know that I needed that other function, but nonetheless, it's all playing nice now. I can edit my third dog. Okay, so add a new, let's just say Jane Doggo. Okay. Just testing. Front end's now doing read, add, update. And what we have left is delete. So minimize. Let's close our backend. And here we have a delete button. We'll bring in our delete trash can. So import the trash can. See if that path looks right. Trash from 2 roots up, node modules, icons, trash SVG. Bring in the delete button. Now this delete button, I wrote a function to show a modal. This is a bootstrap modal. And for this to work, right. Let's write this function to show modal with a hook. Const show modal. Okay, so I also have a hook for a selected owner. Selected pet owner to the pet owner. Set show modal to true. So when you click this function, it shows the modal and sets the selected pet owner. Now after this row, so there's a closing row, there's a closing div. After this row, we write a show modal. So if show modal is true, then here's the HTML that we show. And this is a bootstrap modal. So all the class names for the bootstrap modal. Here's a function to write. Selected owner first name, selected owner last name. Now, I call this selected pet owner. So selected pet owner, selected pet owner. Set show modal is here. Did I spell that right? AL versus EL. I called it EL. Modal. Let me just call this AL. It's not model, it's modal. Okay, so if you click the close button, you close the modal. And let's change that back to the AL. Okay, so there's one function left to write, which is when you actually click the delete button. And that is going to now I pass this function down. I could just write it right here. But in the app.jsx, I got handle edit, I got handle save, I got a delete function here that I pass down. So this handle delete takes in an ID, so we got to make sure to pass in that ID. Let's get into trigger that refresh. I'm going to write it how I've been writing it here. Set refresh. Increase it by 1. This is the correct syntax for doing that. And we delete from pet owners, passing in that ID. Now on the list, on show modal, here's my handle confirm delete. I need to accept handle delete. On here, and call it here, handle delete. Passing in the selected pet owner's ID, and close the modal. So here's our function call. Let's pass that down to the pet owner list. Handle delete, handle delete. Okay, so handle delete gets sent over. It takes in an ID. It's an asynchronous method. Over here, click the delete button in the modal on the list. Here's the delete button. It calls that function. Let's change that to AL. Okay, wrote a lot of code really quickly right there. Let's bring in our delete button on our form. Which is right here. Here's our delete button. Should say delete. Save that. Refresh it. There's our delete button. If I go to the console, clean console, are you sure you want to delete Jane Marley? Click delete, and there she goes. So, well, she's not going to be there now, but if I delete Bob Marley, delete, goes away, refresh, goes away. So I just like that little modal feature. And so yeah, there we go. We can create new. We can edit. See if I edit again, that clears away. If I go to okay. I guess on an add new, I would like to clear out the form after I add a new because I just added Jane and she's still there. So I'd like to clean that up. And so that's on my form. And that's down here. And so the easy way to do that is after the we now have a handle save, and I think the handle save clears the current owner, but let's just do a very manual set. First name, last name, this is going to clear out the form on an add. Save that, come back in, refresh it. There we go. Cool. All right. And so one or two last things that I can do here is just make a few more things clear, whether you're doing an add operation or edit operation. So with a couple variables, we can change this to say add pet owner or edit pet owner, depending on its state. And so here, if I go to the list, pet owner form, okay, right here, we have a current owner that if the current owner is ever set, then we know we're doing an edit operation. So we can kind of come down here and say in our H1, is there a current owner? A little ternary symbol. Then let's do update if that's true. Otherwise we'll say add, and we'll add the space here. And so now if there's a current owner, it'll say update pet owner. Otherwise it'll say add pet owner. And again, keeping those spaces there for the spaces in the string. Oops. So now if I refresh, it says add pet owner. So I click edit, then it says update pet owner. Pretty simple. A little change there. And you could do the same thing with the button. Like if you change this to say update or add, but nonetheless, I just like the save option. It could just say save either way, whether you're doing an update or an add. Delete, gone. Oh, let's add in a cancel button, right? Because if you don't want to do an update, you might want to cancel instead. And so that makes sense. So this is on the form. So let's bring in a cancel button. So where's that save button? So there's a save button. Okay, so here's handle save. Here's a cancel button that calls handle save. And handle save, if I kind of backtrack, should set the current owner to null. There we go. Nice. And maybe the last thing to do is give it a nice big heading up at the top on our pet owner list. CRUD, create, read, update, and delete pet owner entities. And of course I closed the browser window. Now what's really left, get this working on localhost is nice and fun, but what's really left is getting this deployed on GCloud. And there's a couple of things to do to get that working. Getting it working on localhost is always one process, and then there's always troubleshooting getting it deployed. So getting it deployed is a whole nother beast. And so yeah, bringing in React is always a challenge. Getting this working, even if you've coded it like back to back, you know, coded it before, it's always a little bit of a challenge, but hopefully you enjoyed getting that front end brought in and how this is all piecing together. So one last step, and that is deployment. Okay, the last thing to do is get this software ready for deployment on GCloud. And so the way this is going to be done is by refactoring our local host URL onto the URL that is on GCloud. So I'm going to open up a browser and I'm going to go to cloud.google.com. Cloud.google.com. Let's go back to the console where we began. And if we remember correctly, this was the project that we set up. Let's go to the Cloud Run link. Click on Tailrunner Service, and let's copy this URL to the clipboard. Okay, so now that we have the URL, we get to refactor. Now, this just boots it, and we can debug this. It can say this URL. This actually doesn't matter when it's live, that there's some sort of debug there. And you'll notice I also got rid of the port. Okay, so really all we need is the URL at that point. We do not need to worry about the port. That will be handled for us. Nonetheless, it's okay to keep that line in there. Again, it should not be something we have to worry about. So that's the only place. Really, there's not much you had to do on the back end, but it is on the front end. If I go to app.jsx, okay, there's a couple of places here. Now it is, I will say, as I delete the local host and the port, I will say what's kind of normal here is to load this up into an environment variable. And you could have a different environment variable for production and a different environment variable for local host. And that's another way of coding this. So you don't have to statically configure this route. Okay, so there's two places there on app.jsx, and then pet owner form. Kind of scroll through. Let's get rid of the local host and the port. Paste in the URL. Same thing with the post. Okay. So now that we have this on the front end, remember we need to do a run build. Let me see. Okay, it is as long as your front end is still running, and every time I save, you can see it's retransforming my dist folder, then that's good. So I'm going to go ahead and close that script from running on my front end. It's also not running on my back end. Okay, so at this point, I think I'm ready to deploy, give it a shot. And so GCloud run deploy, and this would be, I guess, the third time so far that we've deployed it. And again, there's always a little bit of troubleshooting involved, so let's choose the default folder, and we name this Tailrunner Service. And I'm going to choose 32. And I will let this spin for a few minutes because it always takes a few minutes to deploy. Okay, now it does look like the service has deployed, so let's go ahead and open it up. I will say the first time I did this, I did have to refresh my browser to get it to show up, and you may have to clear out your history. So I will point out those couple of things, but nonetheless, we are reading out of our database. So I look at the current state of my database. I've got 3 pet owners. If I go ahead and add a new pet owner and just make up there. So we've demonstrated the read. We have done an insert. Let's go ahead and do an update. Now if I refresh here, my insert hits my database. Of course, if I update spot to have a different name, I can refresh and we can see the database is being hit. And last but not least, we can confirm the delete. So we've got CRUD operations on pet owners using React, Express, Node, and MongoDB. One last thing in this deployment section I was going to talk about is how to get this to an actual URL. Okay, and that's with the DNS records. And so let me show that. Okay, so the first spot to look to set this up when you're ready to do so, we're actually already in the right spot. We're under Cloud Run. Again, what you do is you click on the hamburger menu, Cloud Run, and then you click on your service, and then we're going to click on integrations. Okay, and we're going to add an integration for a custom domain. You can see this is Google Cloud Load Balancing. Host your services behind custom domain with Google Cloud Load Balancers across multiple regions. So we're going to click on that, and we're going to type in whatever.com. So this could be tailrunner.com, and we're going to click on add item. Actually, I did that incorrectly. We don't need a second one, so I'm going to delete that second item. And we need to grant all the permissions here. And then we click enable. Now I don't have this .com purchased, but this is the first step. And I'll show you the second step. Okay, and once this was done spinning, it took a minute. I'm going to click on submit. And we will wait for this to finish spinning now. Spinning, it says creating. Okay, so it still says status of pending. I wonder if I click on view details, I can get what I'm looking for. So to connect to your custom domain, it says to complete the process, go to your DNS records for the domain. It can take an hour for the certificate to be provisioned. And so what you need is this IP address right here. Okay, so wherever you bought the domain name, you need to go to that provider, maybe GoDaddy. And so I've got some domains on GoDaddy. And you need to configure DNS. And so I can maybe show where this is at on GoDaddy as I log in on my other screen and show where these DNS records are. And so this is going to vary by provider. If I go to my products, and so here I can kind of see some different domains, and here's one for this domain. If I click on DNS, you go to your host A, records, and you modify whatever IP address is right here to be the IP address that is right here. Okay, now realize it does say it can take an hour for the certificate to be provisioned. So it does tend to take a little bit of time. Again, you throw in this IP address, you edit this and paste it right there. And that will then wire it up so that whenever you go to yourdomainname.com, it'll show your domain name, but on the back end, it'll be running, it'll look like this URL that is the service. There we go. So again, here's the live running service, edits, inserts, deletes, and reads, as well as custom domain management. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Did it in a fast way. Hopefully you enjoyed the way that I brought it to you. Let me know in the comments below. Better yet, if you follow along, here's what I would ask. Show me your finished projects. Give me your URLs to your finished projects. I'd love to see what you built, and the themes that you use, and the data that you used in your database.